The worst impulses of mankind concentrated in one insane backward tribe. The Brotherhood seems to have formed not long after the Great Atomic War. It's hard to know. They care little for history. Some of the Brotherhood scribes we captured further east didn't even know the name of their founder, Roger Maxson. They like to pretty up their mission with trappings of chivalry. But the truth is, they're hoarders. They hoard technology. It's been 200 years, and they still have the mentality of scavengers. They say they're preserving these technologies, but for what? They have no vision. They offer no future. They're a dead end.
Welcome back. The Brotherhood of Steel is often considered to be one of Fallout's most iconic factions, and the one most representative of the setting as a whole, and it's hard not to see why. An insular community based on the idea of protecting humanity from itself, styled as a neo-knightly order operating in the new American wasteland, they act as a microcosm of the series as a whole. Due to this, they've become the poster child for the Fallout games, being present in every single entry into the series at time of writing. However, despite their ubiquity within the series, each iteration of the Brotherhood has a different modus operandi, or mode of operation, from each other, and each chapter approaches the overall goal of protecting humanity slightly differently. As such, today I thought we'd do a deep dive into every Brotherhood chapter that we know of, and what makes them unique. Before we begin, it's important to have a general overview on what the Brotherhood actually believes. The core idea behind the Brotherhood is that they alone are worthy to possess the advanced technology of the pre-war era. This is because they believe that all of humanity outside of themselves cannot be trusted with the means to destroy themselves, and as such, they acquire and hoard technology to prevent another apocalypse. The main concept behind this is that the Brotherhood wants to protect the people of the Waste. It's just that they achieve this by saving them from themselves, rather than any outside threat. While each chapter subscribes to the idea that they need to protect humanity, they differ exactly on how they should achieve this goal and how active they need to be in this endeavor. With that general overview covered, we can now examine each of the chapters by order of their age. We'll begin with the oldest chapter of the Brotherhood and arguably the one with the simplest view on their beliefs. This chapter is technically known simply as the Brotherhood of Steel. However, to differentiate them from their subsequent divisions, I and most others refer to them as the West Coast chapter. The original Brotherhood was formed by Roger Maxson sometime between 2081 and 2082, and is the chapter which operates in California and along the west coast of the southern United States. This is the chapter that we encountered during the events of Fallout 1 at their base in Lost Hills, and during the events of Fallout 2 at their observation bunkers in the Den, Shady Sands, and San Francisco. As stated before, the West Coast Brotherhood is the oldest chapter, having been directly formed by US Army Captain Roger Maxson, after the discovery of the FEV experimentation performed by the scientists at the Mariposa military base. This would lead Captain Maxson to rebel against the United States in the days just prior to the Great War, and after the bombs fell, led the soldiers under his command along with their families back to the Lost Hills bunker, where they would sequester themselves for the better part of the next 100 years. By the time we encountered them in Fallout 1, Roger Maxson is long dead, having been succeeded by his son and later grandson, John Maxson, who is the current elder by the time of Fallout 1. The Brotherhood in this time is arguably the most organized and capable faction in Southern California, as this was before the NCR would dominate the region and consolidate much of its separate settlements together, which is why the Vault Dwellers sought out the Brotherhood to assist them in the fight against the Master's army. At this time, the West Coast chapter was far more isolationist than their modern counterparts, sending the Vault Dweller on a near-death sentence of a mission down to the Glow. The Glow is the area in which one of the many nuclear warheads struck California, specifically at the West Tech Research Facility, releasing FEV into the planet's atmosphere. The Brotherhood would send the Vault Dweller to the Glow, with the express purpose of finding technology that had been lost to the Brotherhood since before the Great War, with the likely assumption that they would have died in the process. The Brotherhood would direct pretty much any aspirants who were looking to join down to the Glow. This is because the West Coast Brotherhood is arguably the most traditional in their beliefs, even compared to other traditionalist chapters. They take their isolationism far more serious than most, to such a degree that they almost never venture outside of their bunkers. And even after the Vault Dweller returned with scores of pre-war technology, they were hesitant to send any forces to combat the Master's army, even after being convinced of the danger that was posed by them. In addition, this chapter operates a little differently prior to the rise of the NCR, as they acted essentially as arms merchants, using their considerable knowledge of weapons to manufacture them for sale to other communities. This is in stark contrast to later renditions of the faction, who rarely share their tech with outsiders. Suffice it to say, the overall ideology of the West Coast Brotherhood can be summarized by them having an extreme distrust of outsiders, believing them to be untrustworthy of any advanced technology. This is likely due to the fact that they are the simplest version of the ideals taught by Roger Maxson, who believed that the end of the world came about due to technology falling into the wrong hands. 200 years worth of time has pushed the West Coast Brotherhood into believing that any hands outside of theirs are the wrong hands. On the topic of Maxson's vision though, we can move on to the second oldest Brotherhood chapter, that being the Appalachian Division. The original incarnation of the Appalachian chapter of the Brotherhood was created either at the same time as or shortly after the formation of the West Coast Brotherhood. This chapter was formed by direct order of Roger Maxson, using the quickly deteriorating satellite communication system to contact remnants of the US Army in Appalachia, specifically a detachment of Army Rangers under the command of Elizabeth Haggerty, similar to the West Coast Brotherhood. This chapter found relations with the more civilian factions in the region difficult, though they didn't abstain from it entirely. After officially becoming part of the Brotherhood, the Appalachian chapter would spend the majority of its time battling in an attempt to contain the growing super mutant threat, born out of the West Tech experimentation in the town of Huntersville, West Virginia. After a major victory, which broke most of the Huntersville super mutants, the Appalachian Brotherhood was tasked by Maxson with the preservation of technology in the Appalachian region. However, this original course would quickly need to be sidelined, considering the rapidly deteriorating state of West Virginia. After expanding their base of operations south into the region known as the Cranberry Bog, the Brotherhood encountered for the first time the Scorched Beasts and the Scorched Plague, which had begun to spread through the region. They would devote most of their time and resources into combating the Scorched Plague that was ravaging the post-war denizens of West Virginia. The Brotherhood scribes had calculated that if the plague was allowed to spread, it could very well spell an extinction-level event for what remained of humanity globally. As such, the Brotherhood expended the majority of their reserves of resources combating the Scorched. Despite however many Scorched creatures they managed to kill, more and more kept appearing. Realizing that time was not on their side, the Brotherhood launched Operation Touchdown in the Scorched Beast nesting area in the Glassed Cavern, with now Paladin Elizabeth Haggerty taking the most well-trained troops of the Brotherhood to confront the Scorched Beasts in their lair and destroy them. The operation claimed the life of Paladin Haggerty and her men, but for over a week no Scorched Beasts appeared on the surface. However, this proved to be optimistic. By the same time next month, the sighting of Scorched Beasts continued to increase in number, indicating that Operation Touchdown had largely failed. Facing the ever-growing hordes of Scorched, most of the other human factions in Appalachia left to avoid being affected. The Brotherhood, however, remained and fought to the last to stem the tide, and grant the people of West Virginia a chance to escape. By the end of the year 2095, the Appalachian Brotherhood had been rendered functionally extinct. This, however, would not be the end of the chapter. Years after the end of the original incarnation of the Appalachian Brotherhood, the West Coast chapter under Roger Maxson would accept a request to send an expeditionary force to Appalachia to ascertain the fate of Elizabeth Haggerty and her forces. Setting out from California, they would cross over 2,000 miles of wasteland over the course of many months, having to navigate through the Rocky Mountains and cross the Mississippi River. Along the way, the expeditionary force would break apart, with some members leaving to rendezvous with other bunkers across the US. By the time they had reached Appalachia, they were now composed of only 3 full Brotherhood members, with the remaining being initiates or others looking to join the Brotherhood. Occupying the Atlas Observatory, as far as we know, by this point in current time, the Brotherhood continues to operate in Appalachia under the second iteration of the chapter. In terms of ideology, both iterations of the Appalachian Brotherhood don't seem to differ much from the West Coast Division, both being equally as distrustful of outsiders. However, the Appalachian Brotherhood is considered more active in their respective region than the West Coast chapter, actively waging a military campaign against the Scorched rather than securing themselves in their bunkers to wait it out, as some other chapters are more inclined to do. Seeing as how the Appalachian Brotherhood received direct orders from Roger Maxson, and the fact that Fallout 76 takes place earlier in the timeline compared to Fallout 1 and 2, It is possible that the Appalachian Brotherhood is closer to Maxon's original vision of the organization, before nearly 2 centuries of stagnation would cause it to become the West Coast chapter we see in Fallout 1. Which would make sense, as one of the core debates within the Brotherhood is the extent to which they should adhere to Maxon's word as stated in the Codex, with some chapters following the Codex to the actual letter, rather than the general spirit inscribed in them. On the topic of the Codex, the last of the Brotherhood chapters which subscribe to the traditional Western ideals we have to look at are the Mojave Brotherhood. Like the Appalachian detachment, this chapter was born out of an expedition sent out from Lost Hills, primarily to secure the pre-war structures around Hoover Dam. Though, in truth, the purpose of this expedition was more to remove the Brotherhood elder Elijah from Lost Hills, due to a series of disagreements within the Council of Elders regarding Elijah's development of new ethically questionable weapons. Sending Elijah to Nevada would both secure the Brotherhood in the region and get his radical ideas out of earshot. Once they had reached the Mojave wasteland, the new chapter discovered an intact military bunker in Hidden Valley, repurposing it as one of their forward operating bases. From there, the Brotherhood scouting turned up the intact solar power plant at Helios 1. Elijah, already considered unorthodox by some within his chapter for his focus on improving technology rather than simply preserving it, immediately ordered for the plant to be garrisoned and converted to the Brotherhood's headquarters, despite the objections from almost every paladin in the chapter. By 2274, the NCR had officially set up a headquarters of their own at the former McCarran International Airport. From there, NCR army forces began spreading out into the rest of the Mojave themselves, ultimately leading to the discovery of the Brotherhood installation at Helios 1. Elijah, still believing that the plant contained an unprecedented military advantage, refused to abandon the Brotherhood's position, in spite of the NCR's approach, and forced his paladins to continue defending it. In 2276, the NCR moved to put an end to the Brotherhood's resistance and launched Operation Sunburst as a final offensive to capture Helios 1. Despite the Brotherhood's technological advantage with their energy weapons and power armor, they lacked the numerical advantage of the NCR, and were gradually worn down by repeated attacks. By the time the retreat signal was given by Paladin McNamara, more than half the chapter had been wiped out. In the midst of the Brotherhood's exodus, Elijah disappeared without a trace. Guided by McNamara, the Brotherhood survivors retreated to the Hidden Valley bunker, while the NCR regrouped at the newly occupied Helios 1. By the conclusion of Operation Sunburst, the Brotherhood's position in Mojave was crippled, but not entirely defeated, which is why we find them in the events of Fallout New Vegas. Fundamentally, this Brotherhood chapter's ideology doesn't deviate too heavily from other traditionalist chapters, owing to their close proximity to the Lost Hills bunker. However, they especially have a more complex relationship towards the NCR than some other chapters. After the Western Brotherhood's brief collaboration with the NCR to drive out the Enclave out of their outpost in Navarro, they would soon enter a protracted war with each other over the jurisdiction of Enclave technology. This war has continued as far as we know to the current time of Fallout 4, as neither faction has been able to rout the other. The Brotherhood was able to destroy the NCR's gold reserves, decimating their economy, while the NCR laid siege to and destroyed several Brotherhood bunkers within California. This conflict was what particularly drove the NCR to attack the Brotherhood at Helios. The difference here being, the Brotherhood in the Mojave, despite their grievous loss of personnel to the NCR, don't harbour quite the same level of resentment towards the Republic as their Western brethren, being at the least theoretically open to a negotiated peace between the factions in the region. In addition, they subscribe to the more traditional Brotherhood belief in that the other factions of the Waste will inevitably die off, and that they simply need to outlast them, as they did the end of the world, which is in stark contrast to the Eastern Brotherhood, who take a more active role in the Wasteland. They also revere the Codex, which enshrines Roger Maxon's word as a near-holy book, from which they derive their entire modus operandi of how they should operate in the Mojave Wasteland, and see any deviation of that as a crime against the Brotherhood. This is different to other chapters who see the Codex more as a loose set of guidelines that they should use to make sure that they are following the overall goals of the Brotherhood. An example of this being the Eastern Brotherhood chapters. On the topic of the Eastern Brotherhood's divergence, that's where we'll turn to next, to examine exactly how they differ from Western Brotherhood ideology. But just before we did cover the Eastern Brotherhood, I felt it necessary that we should have a look at the two largely unknown Brotherhood chapters, that being the Chicago and Montana detachments. Beginning with the Montana chapter, we know absolutely nothing about them, aside from the fact that they were led by an elder named Patrolocus at some point. This lack of lore is due to the fact that they only have one reference within the entire series, that being in a speech made by Elder Lyons in Fallout 3. It may seem pointless to mention them, considering this one speech is all the information we have about them, but regardless, they are a chapter of the Brotherhood within Fallout lore, and this is supposed to be a comprehensive look at all the canon Brotherhood chapters, so I felt they merited inclusion. The next chapter we'll cover is the Chicago Detachment. While not as obscure as the Montana Brotherhood, they still have quite a lot less information about them than many of the other chapters of the Brotherhood. The origins of the Chicago Detachment lie with a fleet of Brotherhood airships dispatched by the West Coast Brotherhood to hunt down and exterminate remnants of the Master's army, which had fled over the Rocky Mountains following the collapse of the Unity. While the majority of these airships were destroyed in a battle or scuttled for parts, one crash landed in the Midwest. The survivors of this organized themselves into a new chapter near Chicago. This detachment at some point combated a large group of super mutants originating from the West. By 2254, the chapter had gone largely rogue, cutting all contact with the larger Brotherhood chapters in the West. The expedition that would become the Brotherhood's Eastern Division under Owen Lyons attempted to restore contact during their journey to the Capital Wasteland, but were unsuccessful in this endeavor. The Chicago Detachment was featured as the main Brotherhood chapter in Fallout Tactics, which isn't canon, so almost all of the canonical information we have on them comes from dialogue with Brotherhood of Steel members in Fallout 3 and 4. With that being said, we can finally move on to the more divergent Eastern Brotherhood chapters, and in my opinion the more interesting ones to look at. You may notice that I said the word chapters. In truth, the Eastern Brotherhood is functionally a single chapter, but for simplicity's sake I'll be dividing it into several distinct sections. With that being said, we can begin with the original incarnation of the Eastern Brotherhood. The Eastern Brotherhood would get its start in 2254, when the Brotherhood's ruling council in the Lost Hills bunker in Southern California decided to send a contingent to the East Coast, with one primary objective: recover any and all advanced technology from the Eastern Coast cities, and to investigate if any remnants of the US government existed on the East Coast. The contingent was placed under the command of Paladin Owen Lyons, a well-respected member of the West Coast Brotherhood. We don't know anything about their trek from Lost Hills to DC, aside from the aforementioned failed rendezvous with the Chicago Brotherhood. The earliest information we have about their journey to the East Coast is their arrival in the city which was once known as Pittsburgh, but by this time had earned a new moniker. By the time Lyons had arrived in Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh had spent nearly 200 years deteriorating into a hellhole of pollution and twisted metal, with the combination of radiation from the war mixing with industrial pollution from the old steel mills around the city, all topped off with the fact that the pit sat at the convergence of 3 toxic irradiated rivers, meaning that the city had developed its own local flavor of mutants, constantly fed by the 3 rivers. When the Brotherhood arrived, they swept through the city, utterly decimating the mutant population, who lacked any organized method to combat the Brotherhood's equipment. Most of the mutant population was eradicated as the Brotherhood sacked the city, took anything valuable with them on their trip to Washington, D.C. It's here that Lyons would have his first of many divergences, opting to rescue many of the non-mutated children who inhabited the pit, taking them in as initiates to the Eastern Brotherhood. Once arriving in DC, the Brotherhood would set themselves up in the ruins of the Pentagon, renaming it to the Citadel. It is from this base that they would conduct operations within the DC ruins. Soon after their arrival, they would discover a menace that was poised to overrun the entire Capital Wasteland, that being the Vault 87 strain of super mutants. Despite being sent out only to uncover technology, Lyons soon began to pity the denizens of the Capital Wasteland, seeing it as his fulfillment of the Brotherhood's oath to defend humanity in the here and now. For many years, Lyons would send reports back to the West, along with requests for more supplies and resources, stringing the elders along until they eventually found out that Lyons had largely abandoned his mission of technological preservation in order to lead a crusade against the super mutant menace. After this was discovered, the elders cut off Lyons from the rest of the Brotherhood, declaring him a renegade. As a result, the Eastern Brotherhood would split off into 2 ideological factions, with the more idealistic humanitarian faction becoming known as Lyons Brotherhood, and the more traditionalist faction becoming known as the Outcasts. We've discussed traditional Brotherhood ideology before, so suffice it to say the Outcasts essentially adhere to a policy more in line with the Western Brotherhood, focused entirely on recovering technology and largely disinterested from other aspects of the wasteland. On the other hand, the Lions Brotherhood was almost entirely different from the Western Brotherhood, believing that the Brotherhood should strive to protect humanity in the present rather than simply holding on to tech for the future generations. This would lead them into a drawn-out war of attrition against the Vault 87 strain of super mutants, along with the Eastern Enclave and the myriad of other threats that populated the capital wasteland. Even after securing relative peace in the region following the Brotherhood Enclave War, the Eastern Chapter would spend the majority of its remaining strength trying to administrate the free distribution of water to the entire region, a task for which they were not ready at the time. This is fundamentally the foundation of the Eastern Brotherhood ideology when compared to the West, the idea that the Brotherhood should strive to protect humanity from the threats that it faces in the present. This particular belief is what would lead Arthur Maxon, once he had reunified the Lions Brotherhood and Outcasts into a single reformed Eastern Chapter, to take elements from both the progressive and traditionalist Brotherhood theories. While still heavily concerned with the procurement of tech, the Eastern Brotherhood under Maxon is far less extreme in what they view as dangerous, as they're largely content to let the ordinary citizens of the Waste hang on to whatever tech they have and aren't known to extort travelers for pre-war artifacts like the Western divisions. However, similar to the Lions Brotherhood, a huge emphasis is placed on the eradication of what the Brotherhood views as abominations, specifically mutants, synths, and feral ghouls. This drive is far in excess of what we see in nearly any other chapter. For example, the Mojave chapter of the Brotherhood is seemingly ambivalent, if not overjoyed, by the presence of a ghoul or nightkin super mutant in their bunker, as evidenced by their reactions to Raoul or Lily Marie Bowen. I personally put this fundamental shift between the East and West's priorities down to the circumstances in which they've been formed. In the West, the majority of the Brotherhood's fear came about due to Roger Maxon's experience in the abuse of technology found in the Mariposa military base and later the Great War. And outside of the Brotherhood's short-lived war with the Master's mutant army, they had very little interaction with mutant kind. The Eastern Brotherhood, on the other hand, fought a 29-year-long war of attrition against the Vault 87 super mutants, with a much more tangible threat to humanity compared to something more esoteric as the misuse of technology. This experience fundamentally molded Maxon's Brotherhood into an organization that would use physical force to directly remove threats to humanity, which they viewed as abominations. This is largely why Maxon's Brotherhood detachment even led an invasion of the Institute itself with the aim of destroying it rather than procuring the technology, as they fundamentally viewed the Institute as a danger to humanity, and put that above the preservation of whatever technologies they may hold. And with that, we've completed our look into every single Brotherhood chapter that we know of in the Fallout series and each of their respective ideologies. And while the majority of the discussion around the ideology of each Brotherhood chapter was my personal opinion, I do hope that this has been illuminating in some capacity. And since there's nothing else, have a wonderful rest of your day.